Welcome to Did You Know the Heart of It, a short podcast from Gloria Academy. In each episode, we unpack the heart behind our schools, practices, and philosophies so we can grow together in our shared mission to raise lifelong worshipers, lifelong learners, and lifelong servants. Whether you're driving, folding laundry, or catching a quiet moment, we're glad you're here. In this episode, we're discussing seeking responsibility from grammar school up through Logic and Rhetoric school with Kandi Playford, our Dean of Culture. Hi, Ms. Playford.
Hello.
Well, we're glad you're here today. And the episode title, when it says seeking responsibility, what do we mean by that?
I think any time that we start to ask how we're going to do something, I think it's really important to figure out to what end we're doing it. So to what end do we want our kids to be self-reliant? To seek independence and self-reliance for their own sake is just, I think it's counterproductive. We live in a culture of expressive individualism. It's this idea that the highest good is outwardly expressing like how we feel and our desires, like you do you be.
Oh, that culture of like, we're led by our feelings and
right.
Whoever you want to be, go be that person.
Right. And you should express it and I should validate it. And so, identity, under that idea is sort of shifting and changing. And so to be independent or to be an individual, right, gives priority to those ideas. So, but what we've seen is that as we move more towards, as a culture, expressive individuality, we actually reduce responsibility. And
that's interesting. So as we move towards this culture of individualism, people are losing responsibility or sense of being responsible and
right. As I think as we inculcate this love of feelings and changing identity that's shaped by your desires, then I think our as humans we're losing this desire to look outside of ourselves.
Okay. And so then that affects even our kids' ability to take ownership for things. So I would even say at a young age, teaching them to have responsibility is also having ownership over I'm responsible for this chore. I'm responsible for my schoolwork. And then also teaching them that kind of that duty to responsibility helps move away from that individualism, like you were saying.
Right. Yeah, chores are a great example. I think, instead of just I'm responsible for this chore so that I get a reward. Mm-hmm. I'm responsible to this chore because it helps my family, right? I'm responsible to my family.
Absolutely. And we could do a whole episode on this expressive individualism and the impacts of that on our culture. But that really sets the foundation for what we're going to talk about, the reason why we want to seek responsibility with our kids. Okay, so we often say we want students to move toward responsibility, like what we're talking about here, but not independence. That's some language we like to use at GDA. Can you unpack that distinction a bit? Why is that language important? We want to move toward responsibility, not necessarily independence. And what does it look like practically in the home and classroom?
Sure. I think the language of responsibility, it anchors independence in a higher purpose rather than self-expression.
Oh, that's excellent. It anchors independence in a higher purpose.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So instead of just expressing myself, I am called to glorify God. We don't want students who actually rely on themselves, right? That just think they can do it
handle everything all by themselves.
Right.
They don't need anybody else.
Exactly. That's not super helpful. In fact, there's a quote by Augustine that says, "The sufficiency of my merit is to know that my merit is insufficient."
Oh, yeah.
So there's this idea of, being able to handle tasks and to take care of myself is great, but it should be anchored to that responsibility and that purpose that we're given, to know God, to make him known, to be his hands and feet.
So when we have our grammar students and we're thinking about these younger kids and we want to instill this sense of responsibility and anchoring independence in their higher purpose, what are some ways we can do that?
Yeah. So one of the things that my husband does is he asks our boys, "What have you done to serve your family today?" So I'm a much more practical person, and I'm like, have you done this? Have you done your chore? Have you done the dishes, right? But my husband just asks them that to connect it back to, we're asking you about being responsible to your family and serving them versus just you can handle all these tasks and check a box.
And really, that's a form, acts of service is a form of love. Right. And loving others like God calls us to.
Right. And sacrificial love, right? Because our kids, it's okay to not want to do the dishes or, right? But when you have that vision of why you're doing it, that it's helpful for your family.
I love that example of, as I'm raising my kids and my younger kids, and moving them towards responsibility, of framing things in that mindset and tying it back to that higher purpose. We were made to glorify God, and how do we love and serve the Lord, and also love and serve those He's put in our lives? When we frame the responsibility in those settings, then I just feel like it's growing really wonderful things in my kids' hearts.
For sure.
Yeah. So as our students get older and they enter into the logic stage, they start to push for more autonomy and personal responsibility. I have seen this coming up recently in my oldest, specifically, even just wanting to check in on schoolwork. She's, I've got it, Mom. And I'm like, no, but let's do some of this together still. And so I'm seeing the beginning of this push for more autonomy. But how can parents wisely support this? Because there is some natural growth there. And I'm just kind of interested to hear your thoughts. How can parents wisely support this while still providing appropriate guidance and accountability?
Yeah. So I've struggled with this as a parent. So I guess I give this advice as one who's done it incorrectly multiple times. But I really think as they move in and start seeking that separation and wanting to stand on their own 2 feet,
pushing back.
Yes, I think they're in the logic stage. It's time to shift our conversations to questions. Really begin asking questions about responsibility and about why. Like, what is the responsibility of being an image bearer? What does it mean to be a Christian in this moment? What is the purpose of what you're doing? Right? No, none of my boys, when they're complaining about an assignment, when I start asking them, why are you doing this? And connecting that to something higher, starting to ask questions even about their habits. Like, what are the habits that you're forming? Who are they shaping you to be? So giving them that vision of, someday I'll be an adult. I'll be, for my kids, I talk about, you're going to be a father. You're going to be a husband.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years or in 10 years?
Right.
And,
C.S. Lewis talks about how every choice that we make, it shifts that central thing that makes decisions into even like a more heavenly creature or a more hellish, like one who would enjoy heaven and God or, is enmity with him. And so I think, they really believe they can figure things out now. And so just changing our dialogue into questions to try to bring out, what is what you're doing now.
So as we enter those middle grades in logic, use questions, and to be your advice.
Yes.
To lead them and kind of guide them through that bigger vision of the purpose behind this.
Right.
And they train themselves to think of it in those terms.
Right. And then, there is a point at which it is so good for them to step out and do things and be responsible for the outcome. I think a lot of times we withhold any sort of natural consequences.
Especially if they might be negative.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But that's the best learning. I mean, we've talked about that, I think, in podcasts before, just that, that struggle, but allowing them to have some freedom and responsibility in things and allowing them the consequences. Because it's a beautiful way to shape that, idea of responsibility.
I love that. And then being responsible for the consequences, like you said.
Right.
So as students mature into the rhetoric school, issues like doing their own work just kind of become more prominent. What did you experience as a parent? What do you see as a teacher of like how parents can really cultivate a sense of ownership and ethical responsibility in their students?
Sure. I think we get into problems when our kids don't have a higher vision of education. I think we do a disservice when we make education about getting a job or,
passing the test.
Yes, going to college, right? I mean, I teach 11th, 12th graders. I have, recently graduated and a senior this year. And the anxiety that comes with the next step can be crushing if that has been the goal.
And sometimes there's temptation in that. When that you fear the outcome, there's temptation to not be responsible for certain things. And, you kind of see this manifest in high school kids differently, whether they kind of go in denial and they don't want to do anything and you can't get them to work, or maybe they look to ChatGPT or cheating or other things.
Exactly.
And we really want to cultivate this responsibility in their hearts for that higher purpose, like you said.
Yeah, and especially, ChatGPT, AI, that's become such a prevalent thing, and helping our students to see why we don't want to use that in so many areas of our education, because they are humans
made in the image of God.
Yes, meant to relate and to think and to reason. Like, all of those are good gifts from above, and we want to cultivate those. Their education is cultivating that versus just passing a test, cram, pass, forget. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's so much more to it.
Yes. And that higher vision of really wanting to train renewal, right? Romans, the renewal of our minds. Like, our minds are probably naturally bent on doing the easiest thing. Right. But as Christians, we're called to renew our minds. Like, we have a mind that's kind of an enemy of God naturally. We seek ourselves and we seek ease.
What does this look like for you when you're working with students in your class or parents at the school? That if a parent is struggling to instill this kind of responsibility, what's some advice you would give them?
So my advice for a parent is something that I preach to myself a lot, and that's that, it's the Holy Spirit's work to change the hearts and minds of our kids. It's our job to point them, to continually point them in the frustrating moments when it feels like they're not listening, when the complaints are, to
keep going in the good work and in prayer.
Right. And gratitude, trying to find, I have one son that is bent towards complaining. I remind him often joy is a choice, right? If trying to find something to be grateful for, in recognizing that God is using all of these things for something we may not be able to see at the moment, but He knows, right? And so I think just remembering that that it may not take effect until much later. Like, we may not see the result of our work with our students, these conversations that we're having with our kids, until much later.
So before I ask you kind of my last question, we went through kind of the different stages: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And it was really helpful to hear your thoughts on, cultivating age-appropriate responsibility and self-reliance with grammar school students by connecting these responsibilities to the higher purpose and starting to talk with them about that and train them and to think of their little responsibilities, right? Their little chores and their smaller homework assignments, to think of those things in those higher terms. And as we talk them through that, and then we get to the logic stage and they start to push back a lot more. Well, maybe now we change our tactics and we ask good questions.
Right.
And we ask questions to lead them to a more long-term vision of their lives. And as we reach high school or the rhetoric stage, then it becomes really continuing to do the good work and relying on prayer and trusting in the Lord.
Right.
That they will get there.
Right.
We keep going and we keep having the conversations, asking the questions, and guiding our kids along the way. Ultimately, the goal isn't just independent or self-reliant individuals, but we desire young men and women who can contribute meaningfully to their families. Like you mentioned with your husband, asking your kids, how did you serve your family today? And how does growing in responsibility prepare students for deeper fellowship in their families and in the church?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think responsibility is outside of yourself. It's holding accountability to something other than yourself, which I think prepares us for fellowship, right? We're created by a triune God to live in relationship with Him, right? And so as we learn to look outside of our own selves and be accountable, responsible to others, I think it prepares our hearts and minds for that ultimate responsibility, which is to God. I know the Institute for Family Studies has taken a look at one of the major reasons for the decline of marriage, which is a heavy reliance on parents.
Really?
Even after.
So if our kids are too reliant on us, they're not going to want marriage.
Right.
Because it's a responsibility.
That does
It's a commitment. It's work. Like, it's all the things.
Right. The generation now is seeing marriage as a burden versus something that's beautiful.
And if responsibility is not cultivated in our kids, they don't experience the joys that come with that higher calling.
Right.
And then ultimately they become more inward looking, right? Like, it's right. Outward looking. And the inward looking ties back to what we said at the beginning, that with the expressive individualism, right? Is that what we talked about?
Yes.
Where they kind of really only care about themselves. They don't want any responsibilities. They don't want to have any too many commitments or burdens to others. But as Christians, we are called to love the Lord and to love one another.
Yes, it's ultimately a worldview issue, right? As humans, what are we made for?
Yeah. And so as we grow and seek responsibility, as we grow responsibility in our kids, it's to prepare them for their walk, for their Christian walk in loving others.
Yes, that's a beautiful way to put it.
That's good. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today about seeking responsibility. I know it'll be helpful to our parents.
Thank you.
Well, we know that finding a school that partners in discipling your child without compromising your family's values can feel overwhelming. Gloria Deo Academy offers a collaborative, classical Christian education where your child can authentically live out their faith and thrive academically and spiritually. Find out more at www.gda.academy. Thanks for listening.
Then sometimes you can really, that's it. Cut that. Starting over.
Let me start over.
Take 2. What am I supposed to say, Robin? That's the most awkward part.
You just say hi. Okay, hi.